G'day, I'm Owen. You've joined the pub test, and in this one we are continuing the Annie Chapman crime scene, but not looking at the exact location as such, but rather how it differed from the Polly Nichols crime scene, and what significance that actually has to the investigation. Now remember, Polly Nichols was found out in the street, and the evidence showed that she wasn't dragged there as such, and it also looks very much like Annie Chapman wasn't taken to that location after the event, but the event happened there at 29 Hanbury Street. But this time, it was in a backyard. It was also a backyard that was known to be used by unfortunates to conduct their business. In fact, the coroner said to Mrs. Richardson at the inquest, "I would not allow that sort of activity to take place in my backyard," and as I understand, she didn't respond to that. And we might think, well, why? If she was the landlady of this entire building, would you not try and stop that activity from going on in your own backyard? Well, there could be a very good reason not to get involved. And it's just simply just live and let live. It's like, they're not doing any major harm, didn't seem to bother the families staying there. So people are just using that hallway to come in and out. Well, they're less likely to cause trouble for you during the day. But that's one possible reason why she allowed those events to happen, but we really don't know. She might have been totally unaware of it as well. Yet, assuming that Lechmere was not the Ripper, and assuming that Robert Paul was not the Ripper would have read about the inquest of Polly Nichols and saw the attention that it got and how many people were on the scene so quickly, including the police. Remember, a police officer found the body before Lechmere and Paul had spoken to another police officer. So that would have made him probably think, or I should say maybe made him or her possibly think that need to find a more secluded spot to conduct these crimes. Otherwise, I'm more likely to get caught. So it does bring a particular suspect to the fore who definitely was in the area. And that is Francis Tumblety. Now, we do not know the exact lodging that he had during the duration of the Whitechapel crimes, but we know that he was nearby, and the general consensus is that he was only 10 minutes away, walking distance to that crime scene where he was staying. And oddly enough, he fits the bill from so many different levels. For example, he really didn't like unfortunates due to previous experience. If you haven't seen the overview video, then go check it out. But there's another little detail here as well. Now, knowing that he was charged with assaults in 1888, and again, see the overview video, you realise these assaults were interactions with other males that at the time was criminal. You would get arrested if you were engaged in those activities with other men. Therefore, I think it's safe to say that some of the blokes who were looking for privacy so they could conduct their own after-hours activities would have known the same haunts that the unfortunate used as well, where they could get privacy. So it's likely that Francis Tumblety knew about this back area in 29 Hanbury Street. And it's reported that he had the knife skills, and it's also said that he had the collection of body parts that he stored himself. And body parts were removed from Annie Chapman, which fit the collection that Francis Tumblety had. Yet with that ridiculous mustache he had, you would think he couldn't hide it, but maybe he had a way. But definitely we can say Francis Tumblety was in the area and he had the skills, and he also expressed about one of the only suspects that we know of that directly expressed his hatred for unfortunates and stated that they should all be done away with. Yet some people say now that Lechmere has to be dismissed from being the Ripper because he couldn't have committed this crime because he had to have been at work by the time the body had been found. It was getting daylight, and when he showed with Polly Nichols, he couldn't hang around because he couldn't be late for work. And it was getting daylight by this stage, so there's no possible way he could have committed the crime. Yet, to the disappointment of many, I would actually challenge that on two reasons. There is debate about the actual time of death for Annie Chapman, but for the sake of argument, let's just say it did happen around that 5:30 a.m. mark, give or take a little bit. Well, who's to say that Lechmere actually worked that day? Because there is thought that this was done on his day off. Likewise, there's no actual evidence to say that Lechmere was working the day Polly Nichols was killed. He said that story, that he was on his way to work, but is there proof that that's where he was going? Or was he patrolling the streets like a genuine serial killer? Now, to me, that is more likely than some bloke wandering off to work and just taking these crimes of opportunity, and as people have mentioned, shoving body parts somewhere in their clothing and then working all day with them doesn't make a great deal of sense. But it does make sense if he wasn't going to work in the first place. Now, I mentioned Robert Donston Stevenson in the last one, and I wasn't intending to mention him in this one because we know he was in the Whitechapel Hospital. But I said in the last video, and I've said it before as well, if there was conclusive proof that he could not get out of the hospital, then we can discount him as being a suspect entirely. We don't need to talk about him anymore. So some information was presented to me from a first-hand eyewitness who had been in that very hospital. But not in the 1880s or even the 1890s, but in the mid-1990s. And I won't go into all the great detail on it, but I will say this. It was said that even in the mid-1990s, that hospital was dimly lit. It had corridors that went everywhere, and it was easy to get lost. In fact, this person went for a walk, and his relatives who came to visit didn't know where he was. But he woke up in the middle of the night and thought a new patient had been admitted to the ward, only to find out it was some vagrant off the street who was looking for a place to sleep, managed to sneak in, crawl into a bed and sleep there. So if you could do that in the 1990s, I think it's safe to say that Robert Donston Stevenson, RDS, could have got out of the hospital. So we can't just eliminate him from the list. And yes, he was in close walking distance. But now there's something that has not been mentioned, wasn't brought up at the coroner's inquest. In fact, I don't think any of these people themselves were even questioned. And that's the police. They're not mentioned at all. And yet the body was found in a spot where crimes were committed every night. We could say yes, because the activities that the unfortunates and maybe blokes themselves were performing in there were criminal back in the day. So you would think that would be an area that was patrolled. Richardson doesn't say that he saw a policeman when he was heading to the market. Not that he had needed necessarily be looking out for one. But even Davies, who actually found the body, had to go to the police station and didn't meet an officer along the way. And we know he couldn't have met an officer along the way because he got to the police station and raised the alarm. So again, where were the police on the beat? But fair enough, during the day they would have scaled back those patrols, and maybe they went back to the police station waiting for all the reports to come in from the overnight crimes, and then they'd go out and investigate them. But it is odd that there's just an absence of a police presence in this area only a week after the Polly Nichols crime. But let's throw in some speculation, and this is not solely my speculation, this has been theorised. PC Neal, who was the first policeman on the scene of Polly Nichols' crime, could have been on this beat now. because they didn't just patrol the same area every single night. And he also would have known the amount of attention that came to that initial crime. So if it was a policeman, and we're just using PC Neil as the example here, well then he would know you would need a quieter location to commit this crime, which is a pattern that follows for the next one as well. And it would have been very easy for a policeman to gain the trust of one of these unfortunates and take them to that secluded area. And if they got seen there, well, they got a perfect alibi. I was arresting somebody. Or I heard a crime and I came and investigated and the person's taken off. But there are at least another 8 suspects who were in the area that also could have taken advantage of the opportunity of that secluded area in Hanbury Street to commit this crime. And we won't go through all of them. We will be bringing more up in later videos. But following this crime, the papers went ballistic on the Jack the Ripper saga. Letters were flying in, and yes, many were written by the media themselves. But the pressure was now coming on the police force massively. And perhaps it was even noted that there was a lack of police presence. So something happened between this crime and Elizabeth Stride's murder. And that is the rise of the Vigilance Committee. And yes, trust me, there's some interesting individuals to look at there, including some who are considered suspects themselves. So let me know down in comments what you think of this one. Was the slight change in location strategic by the perpetrator, or did it just transpire that way? Do you think Tumblety now should be raised a little bit higher on the list? I'm really excited about diving into the Vigilance Committee because it shines a different light on the entire saga, and I've hardly touched on that so far in this series. But thank you very much for watching. It genuinely is appreciated. I'm Owen, you've been watching The Pub Test, and we will see you on the next one.